Hi, I'm Jacques. As I'm saying this, I'm sitting in my room in Los Angeles wondering how the time passed so quickly. You see, a month ago, I was in Taipei, exploring night markets, going on hikes, learning how to speak Mandarin, and a year ago, in July 2019, I was living in a Shaolin temple with real Shaolin monks. Yeah, those ones. Learning how to meditate, how to do kung fu, but what was I doing there? The short answer is, I wanted to figure out who I was and what I cared about. The long answer?
Jackie.
It's May 2019. After 4 years in the quiet suburb of Swarthmore, Pennsylvania, I graduated from college. I was excited, of course, but something didn't make sense to me. I still felt the same. Wasn't this the moment where I was supposed to feel like an adult? Wasn't this what being a grown-up was all about? You get a job, pay rent, learn to bake your own banana bread, go to happy hours. This was probably what my parents thought of when they heard American Dream. Okay, maybe not the happy hours. The point is, I still felt like a kid. College had been a time of self-discovery and growth, yes, but it was also a time of intense stress, driven, I think, by a need for achievement. It's hard to think deeply about questions like, who am I and what are my values, when the most pressing question of every week is, how many problem sets do I have left? Because if you weren't ahead, then you were behind. Not just on assignments, but in the game of life. At least, that's what it felt like. It felt like we were always working towards the next thing. In high school, we're taught that you have to get good grades to get into a good college. In college, we're taught you have to get good grades to get a good job, and then you needed a good job for a good life. It never stopped. It was all so linear and terrifying. Ahead, behind, those are words people use to describe a race. What I wanted to know, and the reason why I wanted to take a gap year is, what would happen if you stopped running? So I did. My journey took me first to the Southern Shaolin Temple in Putian, China. In my mind, living like a monk was the farthest thing from chasing achievement that I could think of. After all, for the next month, I was going to do nothing. I don't literally mean doing nothing, we'd actually be physically doing quite a lot. But we weren't writing articles or reading prep books or anything. So what did we actually do? You know those self-improvement videos on YouTube where people do challenges for 30 days, take cold showers, wake up super early, meditate for an hour a day? Now imagine putting all those things together into one intense month-long challenge. And then you throw in some classes about Buddhism, some stuff about Chinese culture, and that's what living like a monk was like. Our days began at the crack of dawn to the sound of a gong. We'd wake up at around 4:40 a.m. and get ready for 5 a.m. Kung Fu. Every morning we'd line up in 2 single file lines, by height. And we were supposed to do this in complete silence. Talking was not permitted. Everyone wore the same baggy white and green uniform, which by the end of the Kung Fu session would always be dripping with sweat. After exercising, we'd again file into line, and when the line supervisor signaled, we'd march over to the dining area for breakfast. So meals in the monastery were pretty particular. In addition to being completely vegan because Buddhists don't believe in killing and eating animals, there were also a very strict set of rules that we had to follow. For one thing, we had this 4-bowl system, and so I actually went and found my bowls, which I haven't touched in a year. Oh, cloths that we had to use to clean our bowls, of course. So, 4 concentric bowls. We have the little one here, which was for trash, so for example, if you ate a piece of corn, you left the cob in here. We got our second smallest one, which we used for, I think, soy milk in the morning, and then in the afternoon or dinner, soup, so that would be in here. The third smallest one, which we would use for vegetables, and no, it's mostly vegetables. And then we have the biggest one, and the biggest one was for rice, if we had it, or any other grains that we had.
You have proved that you fight well. Now you can join us.
In addition to our 4-bowl system, we had a couple of rules that we had to follow while we were eating. The first is that we had to eat in complete silence with good posture. And while we were doing this, we were supposed to contemplate our food. So, what does it mean to contemplate our food? Essentially, it means to think about all the effort that went into the food in order to get it in front of you. There's the human element of people having to grow it and cook it and serve it to you, and then there's the non-human element. Sunshine, rainwater, things like that. And so by contemplating our food, we're expressing our gratitude to that entire process. And then the final rule, which I thought would be the most difficult, is even though you can refuse any of the food as it's being served to you, the moment it touches your bowl, you have to finish it. And it doesn't matter whether or not you like it, whether or not you think it's disgusting. The problem is, with temple food, sometimes you didn't know what you were getting. In the end, I figured out that everything tasted pretty good, but when you're first trying it, you don't know whether or not you'll like it. And so you can signal to the person who's serving, like, oh, I just want a little bit, but if they end up giving you too much, and you find out that you hate it, guess what? You still gotta finish it. That's the whole Zen thing, right? Like, there's no good, there's no bad, there just is. Yeah, you kind of learn that lesson when you're eating.
You have proved that you fight well. Now you can join us.
After breakfast and between lunch, we had 3 hours of classes on topics in Buddhism, the history of Buddhism, how it spread, different schools of thought. After class, we'd line up for lunch again, march over to the cafeteria, chant, eat silently, wash our bowls, and line up again. Afterwards, we would have a 2-hour break. Then we would have a 1-hour meditation, 1 hour of community service or a cultural class, such as Chinese medicine, where we would have a local Chinese doctor come in and teach us about some of the principles. If you think this sounds very mechanical, you're right. It was essentially Buddhist boot camp. Not the Zen meditation retreat that some people had imagined. And for a lot of us, this is the first time that we were living under such a strict schedule. And I think precisely because we had such a strict schedule, I never felt, 1, guilty about not being busy, and 2, the sense of existential boredom that sometimes comes up when you have a lot of free time. I think in college, there are definitely times where I felt bad about not being busy. I think I was conditioned to equate being busy with being productive. And if I wasn't doing anything, then sometimes I felt guilty that maybe I wasn't doing enough, or maybe I wasn't working hard enough. It's a quick recipe for burnout. But being in the monastery taught me that being busy and being productive aren't the same thing. And it's not always easy to tell which is which. It's like walking onto a track and seeing 2 people walking laps. It might look like both of them are taking it easy and enjoying the walk, but maybe one of them had just ran 5 miles and was cooling down, and maybe the other was just there for a stroll. I knew that with the schedule, I was doing everything that I needed to be doing. And so if I had a break, it was because I had earned it, not because I wasn't working hard enough. Because we had such a packed schedule where we were constantly paying attention to our posture, standing in line, marching, and sitting silently, it often felt like we were doing both a lot and nothing at all. But I think that was the point. If you're constantly in motion, then it's hard to pay attention to what's actually happening in the present moment. But I think if you could learn to pay attention and be present in the physical world, when you're standing in line, paying attention to how your feet were positioned, or when you're washing your bowls, paying attention to things like how much water am I using, then maybe you could also learn to be present in the mental world. Most of us, when we think about meditation, think it's about sitting still on a cushion or a chair, closing our eyes, and trying not to think. But if you've ever tried not to think, you'd know that's pretty much impossible. So I don't think meditation is about trying not to think, because otherwise that'd be way too hard. I think actually that it's the opposite. Instead of trying not to think, it's about realizing that no matter what we do, we can't really stop our thoughts or stop our emotions. The best that we can do is observe them in a non-judgmental and compassionate way. In the form of meditation most of us are familiar with, we pay attention to our breath. We count each one in and out. And while we do this, thoughts will inevitably come up. The breathing in this case is simply an anchor, something to remind us that even though we can't stop thinking, we can always choose what we pay attention to. But, and this is the part that really surprised me, meditation doesn't have to be about sitting and breathing. The point of it all really is to be present and be intentional with our intention. Be intentional with our attention. And really that's what we were doing when we were standing in line, paying attention to how our feet were positioned or how straight our back was. And the same thing that we were doing when we were eating or washing our bowls. About 2.5 weeks into the program, we had something called Silent Week. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a week of complete silence. And that meant not only in our real lives, we weren't allowed to talk or communicate with anyone, but also in our virtual lives. This meant no using our phones to text, call, or use social media at all. In addition to that, we weren't allowed to read, write, or do any kind of creative projects, because that would have introduced a lot of external stimulus into our lives. The goal of Silent Week was to bring us into our inner worlds, to have that conversation with ourselves that maybe we weren't always having because we were constantly being distracted by other things. And something kind of crazy happens when you're sitting in silence for an entire week. During meditation, I would remember things that I didn't even know I remembered. Things that had once made me happy, things that had made me sad, things that had made me angry, memories from childhood, from past relationships, all of these things that were sitting in my subconscious that I had not paid attention to, or not really cared to pay attention to in the course of my regular life. I guess one way to describe Silent Week is if you took an entire year of therapy and crammed it into a single week. And if you do that, you kind of learn a lot about self-love and self-compassion and all these abstract concepts. Admitting defeat is never easy. That's what I told myself on the 5th day of Silent Week. I had known since day 1 that sitting cross-legged for multiple hours was going to be painful. But I didn't know it was going to get this bad. By the 5th day, even though I was taking painkillers before almost every meditation session, after 30 or more minutes of sitting cross-legged, I'd be in tears if not crying. The only way I know how to put it is imagine a really large pizza box and trying to spread saran wrap on top of that pizza box. That's what my knees felt like after every session. It just felt like someone was trying to stretch them out really wide. But I thought I could handle it. Surrender. That's what the first card said. That's what my meditation instructor told me when I told her about the pain in my knees. She said, "Pain is trying to tell you something. Also, why did you wait 5 days before telling me?" Well, to be honest, I felt embarrassed. Everyone else was sitting just fine. I'm sure they were going through pain too, but they were sitting through it. It is your path. That's what the second card said. It didn't matter what everyone else was doing. This was my journey, one of the most personal and intimate that I would ever go on. And my ego, my fear of appearing like I wasn't as good as everyone else, was getting in my way. After that, I switched from meditating on a cushion to meditating on a chair. The pain in my knees went away, and I actually began to enjoy meditating again. Looking back, was it really that big of a deal? Did it matter that I was sitting on a cushion instead of a chair? No. It didn't matter at all. So, all of these lessons that I learned at the monastery are things that you can find in a lot of self-help books. Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday teaches you to not let pride get in the way of making good decisions. The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck by Mark Manson teaches you how to pay attention and give energy to those things that really matter in your life. There are books about minimalism that teach you how to discover what's essential in life and to strip away those things that aren't. And there are books about stoicism that teach you how to be present and not be swayed by temporary impulses and irrational fears. These books provide blueprints and principles, but they can't do the actual hard work of experiencing life for you. It's one thing to determine whether or not a piece of advice is sound, but it's not until you've applied it and actually seen the results is it possible to determine what its value is to you. Wisdom is knowledge and experience. That's also how I know that I will probably never willingly shave my head again. I don't need more of that experience to tell me about the superficiality of appearances. But wait. This video is about me taking a gap year, and so far I've only talked about a single month. What happened during the rest of the year? I guess you'll have to find out.